Hey, welcome back. It's day 3 of 10 Days with Chuck, and today I'm going to cover AI session management. So one of the things that is really problematic within AI agent frameworks is handling conversation context, i.e. memory. And I thought I would build a conversation manager, something that deals with the context, but I will build in concepts such as hierarchical session management, which allows you to do things like branching and A/B testing and going off in different directions and resuming where you left off. It also gives you the ability to have something called infinite context management. So first thing that we will do is I will do a UV init. I'm in a folder already called Chuck AI Session Manager Record. You can see it's basically empty until I did the init there. I'm going to add Chuck LLM, for the demos there. I will also add in Chuck AI Session Manager, so then when we're working with it directly. Now, as you can see there, Chuck LLM brings Chuck AI Session Manager along with it, but if you need to add it, you can just do UV add Chuck AI Session Manager. And again, if you prefer pip, you can do a pip install. So let's get started with that. Now, if you remember in day 1 when we were dealing with Chuck LLM, if you haven't checked that out, go check out that video. But the Chuck LLM package allows you to work with multiple LLM providers in an easy way. It has both high-level and low-level APIs. We're going to use the high-level ones here. And in this case, I'm going to use the conversation, which is the stateful piece. Remember, if you use ask, for example, then that is not going to be stateful. Now, everything within the Chuck LLM is asynchronous by native, but I do provide sync wrappers as well. So to get started, I'm going to do an async with conversation. I'm going to set the provider as equal to, we'll say OpenAI for just now. And then it will default onto the GPT-4.1 models, I think. And then I will just start with a very simple conversation. So I'm going to say print, and we'll just put user, my name is Alice, and I'm learning Python. So nice and simple sort of prompt. And now if I want to send that to the LLM, I am just I'll have response 1, and I'm going to say await chat.say, and then we'll just paste in the same text as we had a second ago. My name is Alice and I'm learning Python. And then we will print off response 1 there. So nice and simple. That's just going to be the first part of the conversation. And then I'm going to follow this up with print, and we'll put user, and then we'll just follow up with the question, what's my name? And again, I'm going to be super lazy. I'm just going to say, we'll say that's response 2, and we're just going to take the what's my name, and I'm just going to pass that to the AI. Now, of course, I'm just printing it up here, a little bit of duplication, just because we want to see what we've typed. And again, we'll just do a print response 2 there, and then we'll do an async io.run, and we'll pass in my main. And of course, in order to do an async io run, I'm just going to need to import async io. Now, we'll run that for a second, and then we'll make it a little bit more complicated as we go along. So if we just run that for a second there, you're going to see my name is Alice, I'm learning Python. That's great to hear. So you see that the key thing is there that within that conversation, the LLM has remembered what your name is. And in this case, your name is Alice. By default, it's using an in-memory session provider. Redis is supported. We'll show that a little bit later on. But basically what's happening is when I call the chat say there, then that is going to the LLM, but it's automatically being tracked in the session manager. And then when I do chat say, again, that's been automatically tracked in the session manager, and it's been tracked as a part of a conversation. You don't need to remember anything about that. And again, if I want to go a little bit further, for example, I can continue asking questions. So if I say something like, what am I learning? then as you can imagine, it's just going to continue on variations of what we had before. So we'll put that to response 3. And then again, if I run this, you see it's going to just continue on a conversation. So, what am I learning? You're learning Python. And again, I can just keep continuing on that conversation. So if I add in one more piece, we'll just ask it if it can suggest a beginner project. So just paste that in there and we'll run that one more time. And now it will continue on and it will say, here's a project you can do within Python, but the context is maintained and I don't need to do anything underneath the hood. And the reason I don't need to do anything underneath the hood is within the Chuck LLM conversation wrapper is the Chuck AI session manager. And the Chuck AI session manager is built upon Chuck sessions. So these sessions can be persisted against Redis or in memory, and it doesn't matter which there. And I'll extend that in the future to other things like MongoDB. If you want to, you can use the Chuck Session Manager directly. We'll just add a new file. We'll call it sm.py. Again, really a sort of imaginative name there. But within sm.py, if I want to avoid all of the Chuck LLM wrappers there, I can then just do something like, again, import async IO. But now I can do from Chuck AI Session Manager, and we can import Session Manager. And again, it's really easy to get working with the Session Manager. I can just do an async def main, and then I can just say sm equals Session Manager. And then if I want to, I can just start tracking sessions in the same way. So in this say, I'm going to say user says, and we'll say, hi, my name is Alice. And if we want to track the output from the LLM, I'm not going to interact with the LLM in this case, but if I want to track what the LLM is saying there, I can just do AI response, and we'll say something like, hi, Alice. And then again, from a tracking perspective, we can even print out the session ID. So what I can say here is session ID is, and then we can just put in sm.session ID, and then you will see that this is all part of a session ID. So if I just do async IO run, and you can see it's printing out the session ID. So it's all tracked in that sense. Again, the session manager is pretty powerful. It's very, very low level in that sense. I can even capture the model. So if I want to track the model against that, I can say GPT-4o, for example, and I can say the provider is equal to OpenAI, and then all of that is going to be stored as part of the session. I can access the conversation history within the session manager as well. So if I want to do something like history is equal to await sm.get conversation, and then if I want to, I can just print off the whole conversation. So we'll just loop through the conversation history, and then we'll just run that one more time, and you see there's my conversation history. User, hi, my name is Alice, and then the assistant responds, hi, Alice. So all of that is being tracked underneath the hood. Now, of course, if I want to, I can come back into the hello Pi example for a second, and then I can just print off the conversation history in the same way as I did before. So as you can imagine in Chuck LLM, it's slightly different. So I will just do chat.get history. And then if I run this one more time, you can see it's ran through all the things before, but then at the bottom there, you see here's my conversations history. The system prompts you're an intelligent AI assistant. And then there is the entire history that we had before. So again, all of this, and I'm not saying that this is complex, this is pretty easy to do, but all of that session management tracking happens automatically underneath the hood within Chuck LLM, and you can access it just via the chat using chat.get history. So it's all part of the conversation. It's automatically tracked for you. That's not to say that you might want to use the session manager independently. You might want to use it with the OpenAI models or Anthropic models directly without going through the Chuck LLM, and then you're very capable of sort of doing that. There is some cool functionality that Chuck LLM has as well. Things like the ability to summarize. So if I say summary is equal to chat.summarize, and of course I'm going to need to await that. Then I do a print of the summary. Then what you are going to see there is I do a little bit of LLM magic underneath the hood. And now what will happen is it's going to go through everything as it did before. It's going to ask the various questions. It's going to track the conversation. But then at the very end here, you can see here, I've got my call functions, but it says Alice is learning Python, blah, blah, blah. So it's taken the conversation history, it's ran it through the LLM to get a summary, and then it's given me a summary of the conversation. Now, that's not the only thing that's in there. I can also call a thing called extract key points, very similar to summary. But what it's going to do there is take the conversation history, go look through it, and then just extract out the key points of the conversation and print that back. So you see there, your name is Alice, you're learning Python, I suggested beginner progress, da 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 da. So there are some pretty cool helper functions that I think can really sort of help underneath the hood. One of the other nice things that it has is it's got the ability to track things like the messages, the tokens, and the cost of that. So if I come back into my session manager for a second, I'm going to get rid of all the history stuff there. And this time on the session manager, I'm going to call get stats. And then I'm just going to capture the number of messages, tokens, and the cost there. So if we run that, this time we'll run sm.py, because we're working with a direct session manager. You see there, it's captured the number of messages, one from the user, one from the AI. There's 8 tokens, and then it'll estimate the cost there as well. So one of the things that's happening underneath the hood in the session manager is we track the number of tokens. At the moment, it's just using tick token, but again, in the future, it can be set to something else. So we'll probably do it per library, and then it gives an estimation of what that cost is. But again, if I want to, I can access this directly within Chuck LLM. And again, I can just pull it from the chat there. So you see it was part conversation. There's something called get session stats. So I just do that. I'm going to print out the stats raw. And then if we just run this for a second, you're going to see it's running through the whole conversation, just as we did before with the direct session manager. But now you're going to see it's going to come back with the total number of messages, 4 user messages, 4 assistant messages. It's got a system prompt, tells you the number of tokens, the conversation ID, the session ID, all of that, and what the estimated cost is there as well. Now, I think this stuff, though, is kind of table stakes. Really what I want to be able to show is something that I said is this ability to branch off your conversation. And I think this is a super powerful feature. I'm going to do this within the context of the Alice conversation. And I'm going to do this within Chuck LLM. So actually what we're going to do is I'm going to remove all of this. I'm going to say print. And we're going to say main, and I'm going to say something like, I like cats. So that's the sort of starting of the conversation. And then we're going to say await chat.say, and we'll say, I like cats. So this is sort of back to kind of where we were. But now what I want to be able to do is start to work within a branch of the chat. So we're going to work off of a different run here. So to do that, I'm going to do it in async with.chat.branch. And then I'm going to set the name of that to branch. And then I'm going to say print, and we'll say, we'll just mark out the fact that we're doing a branch. So I'm going to say branch, and I'm going to say, actually, I prefer dogs. Okay, so we're kind of nice space here. And then rather than saying chat, I'm going to use branch at this point. Branch.say, and we're going to say, actually, I prefer dogs. Now, what I want to do is, so we started on this main chat. I said, I like cats. Then we created this branch, and we're saying, I prefer dogs. So I'm actually going to come back onto the main line, and I'm going to say, what do I like? So I'm asking a question. And then I'm back to chat. I'm not using branch, and say, what do I like? And then the AI is going to, hopefully, if the demo gods are good with us, it's going to tell us that we prefer cats. So you see what happens there. I like cats. Actually, I prefer dogs. What I like, as you mentioned, I like cats. And you see it knows nothing about what happened within the branch. Now that is super, super amazing. But what happens if I want to come back to the branch? Well, this is pretty cool. So one of the things I could do is I could grab a conversation ID. So remember, we're storing the conversation ID every time. And I'm going to say await branch.save. So I'm going to save the branch so I can come back to it later. So again, we can save and load branches as we go along. And then what I'm going to do over here is I'm going to come back to my earlier branch. So I'm going to come out of the conversation. I don't want to be in the same code block as that. So I'm going to say print resuming. And because I've saved this, I can go async with conversation. And then we're going to say resume from, and then I'm going to pass in the conversation ID that I had from earlier. And again, to make that work, I'm just going to set conversation ID is equal to none up here. So just so that I've got that within scope. And then we're going to set that as equal to chat. And then we'll say resumed. And we'll say what breeds are good for apartments. Now, the key thing about this is, as I type this out, so we'll just do an await chat.say, is that we are not specifying whether it's a cat or a dog. We're relying on the conversation for it to be able to know at this point. So we'll just print off the response as we did before. And then hopefully if the demo gods are in our favor, we should hear about dogs that are good for apartments. So you see here, we start with I like cats. The branch is I prefer dogs. I say, what do I like? You mentioned that you like cats. And then I resume because I saved it. And then I resume where I left off. What breeds are good for apartments? And then several dogs breed and adapt for that. So that is the ability to branch within conversations. And the reason that's possible is I'm basically using session hierarchy. So if I were to, let's draw that out for a second. So if I go to TL draw, for example, and what's actually happening underneath the hood here is I'm starting with a session. And then what we're going to have here is we are maybe going to have conv1, and then what we're going to have here is maybe branch 1, and then we're going to have branch we could have branch 1.1 if we wanted. We could keep doing this forever, right? And we could have we could even have branch 1.1.1, but then if we want to, we can then go to branch 2. So this is the power of not having a flat conversation hierarchy and in our session. That means that we can experiment and go down different lines and then come back up. Super, super powerful. And as you can imagine, that opens up a whole sort of set of use cases that you maybe couldn't have imagined before, right? So you could have role-playing type adventures. You could use this for tool calling. You can do a whole sort of ton of things. You could do it for things like Sudoku solving. Being able to control that session in a hierarchical fashion gives you huge amounts of ability to keep the AI focused on the task. So I think that's a pretty fun sort of innovation in that sense. Now, the other thing that I sort of said I was going to get onto was going to be the infinite context manager. So I'm going to actually open up rather than sit and coding this one because I think it's a little complicated. What I'm going to do is run one of the demos from the Chuck AI session manager. Now, infinite context is already handled directly within Chuck LLM, but I'm going to go through this example here. So this is a sort of regular session. You see it's going to say hello world, hi, whatever, and then it's going to do some sessions. When we create the infinite session manager, all you need to do, and you can do the same in Chuck LLM, is you just set the infinite context equal to true. And what I'm going to do here is force a very low token threshold. And then again, I'm going to basically give it a new sort of segment every turn. And then what will happen here, we'll run out of tokens very, very quickly. But then what it can do is it can just go and summarize the session and create a new session. And then that means the session will go on forever. So it becomes an infinite conversation. So the example here is in Chuck AI Session Manager and it's under 0.3 infinite context. So we'll run that for a second, run examples, and I think it was 0.3 infinite context. So just to kind of see that running there. So we start off session ID, message 1, segment 1, infinite false. That's fine. We then move on to an infinite session. So it creates an infinite session and then it's just going to continue on. And then it will just create new segments. So you see what's actually happened is it's chained together 6 sessions together because of its very, very small, and then it can just continue on where it left off. So even if you run out of tokens, it will just basically create a new session. It will summarize the old session, and then you can continue on where you left off. And it gives you true infinite sessions. So again, that's a pretty kind of cool feature. It just happens underneath the hood though in Chuck LLM. And then, as I sort of said before, you saw the simple example, but if you wanted to use the Chuck AI Session Manager without using Chuck LLM at all, you can do that. So in this demo here, this is an OpenAI demo. See, I'm using Chuck AI Session Manager, and then you see I'm getting my OpenAI client. I have to manually track the calls. So I'm getting my session manager, I do my completion, I extract the choices, I'm adding it in, and then eventually here, I'm just adding things to the conversation. But you see it does work. So let's run the demo. So we'll run O4 OpenAI demo, and then you'll see no Chuck LLM involved in this one. But you can see it start building the conversation. It's got turn 1, turn 2, turn 3. You see it's now using the infinite context manager as well. So that works equally if you're using directly with things like OpenAI or Anthropic there. And it will just continue. And it can continue the conversation, right? Because it's got the summary from the previous session. So infinite context works. So I think that's a pretty cool use case. And then, of course, if I wanted to, I'm using the in-memory session provider. But if I wanted to, I could just switch to Redis by setting the session provider is equal to Redis and then setting my session Redis URL. If I did that, I would need to install Redis as well with the Chuck AI Session Manager. But that means you would automatically get it to run your conversation across multiple servers. So again, for production scenarios. So, and underneath the hood, that uses Chuck Sessions to drive the session management. So Chuck AI Session Manager uses Chuck Sessions, and Chuck Sessions was what we covered in day 2. So again, hopefully you find Chuck AI Session Manager super useful. I think this concept of having hierarchical sessions, infinite context sessions, etc., and then combined with Chuck LLM, having it automatically tracking and wrapping the conversation is pretty cool and a great innovation. So hopefully you will go have fun with that. Go install it. Again, it's on my repo, Chris Hay UK, and then you Chuck AI Session Manager, and you can go use that. Anyway, hopefully you enjoyed day 3 of 10 Days of Chuck, and hopefully you find the tools useful.